All right. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and thank you for tuning in. Um, I'm going to be honest. There's a lot to talk about today, and I am I don't know, not feeling it, which is really weird. I should be, but I'm not. I mean, I'm going to soldier on. I've been sitting here for like the last 2 hours, give or take, clearing my head. I don't even really know what got sideways up there, but yeah, I've been trying not to get on here and just turn into another rant machine, and I don't want to do that, but God, the discourse around UFC 319 has just really, really started to bother me. And I did kind of figure out why. I did, I think. So, yeah, what do we got tonight? Review of UFC 319. We'll be previewing UFC on ESPN Plus 115. No one's going to care about that card, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And I cleared out, there was a few other maybe could have been news bits, but last week the UFC dropped their new broadcast deal the day after I said we need to know about it, so you know. The unpaid intern over there who holds those things back just to make me feel foolish, good job. I kid. That would be a little bit too paranoid on my part. So we'll be talking about that, and that's got a lot of stuff to unpack. So yeah, anything you can do, of course, to help out the product. Any way you can interact with it, y'all know the drill. I don't feel like going through the whole boilerplate today, so yeah. I will just leave it at that. Okay, let's jump into this, shall we, I suppose? So, UFC on UFC 319, one of the last pay-per-views, because we'll get into that when we get to the UFC's new broadcast deal. Let's see. How did we do prediction-wise? Not great, 7-5. One of those you're gonna have to just trust me. I hate saying that, by the way. We had a couple of fights that came together during fight week. Um, and one of them, my prediction would make sense because Basarangai's Sister was like the biggest favorite on the whole card. But another big favorite on the card was Idris. Albazi? Not Albazi. Hang on. Alibi. Alibi Idris was a big favorite to win that season of The Ultimate Fighter at flyweight, and I didn't pick him. But don't you always go with the favorites? I have a slightly different rule when it comes to the Ultimate Fighter finales, which is weird, I know, but hear me out. Um, if someone gets a lot of hype through tough, but then winds up facing a guy from the other side of the bracket who's just kind of hard-nosed and a little bit of a bad matchup for them, that's kind of where I lean. I mean, I picked Kelvin Gastelum to beat, what's his nuts? Uriah Hall when they fought on the finale of Tough. And Uriah Hall had been this scary knockout monster all season. Like, how could y'all pick against him? You're just being... No, we did, because we can see some of the tea leaves on this stuff. So that one you're just going to have to trust me. Like, yeah, I got a thing about, a guy who actually had fought in the UFC before, is a pressure fighter, fighting another guy who gets by on pressure and is less experienced. Like, that's not difficult math, at least for me to make a pick like that on. But we also lost, I mean, what did we lose? We lost King Green and Diego Ferreira. We lost Brian Battle and Nursultan Rozboyev. Battle missed weight for middleweight. I can call him fat now. I'm probably not going to. I've kind of retired that bit, but for the record, Battle has now missed weight 3 times across 2 weight classes. That used to be a thing where I could call you fat. John Lineker used to call him fat. I've been trying to remember that guy's name for like 2 days. was just not coming to mind. Now remember, oh yeah, the fat John Lineker. I called Charles Oliveira fat for a while because he missed, dude, he missed at featherweight so badly. 3 times. One time he weighed 155 for a featherweight fight. Literally weighed in at title weight for the weight class above. Ugh. But, so I could call Brian Battle fat. We'll see if I choose to or not going forward. Dude weighed 190 for a middleweight fight. I don't know. Pardon me. I I got nothing for that. Fight got called off. I don't know. I'm not saying cut the guy, but he was complaining the day before, like, the other guys are the reason we're not on the main card or we are very early on the prelims. Like, my man, you'd already missed weight twice, and now you're the reason the fight fell out. Bad look. I still think Battle has some ability, but good grief, man. Get that stuff figured out, whatever it entails. So we lost those 2 fights. Okay, what else did I get wrong or right that I feel good about? I should have got Drakkar Klose over Edson Barboza. I didn't. I should have. I probably should have got. I maybe should have got Elliott. That seems like a bit of a stretch. I feel pretty good actually about, in particular, the Lerone Murphy pick. Not just because of how it played out, by the way, but I think I saw a lot of stuff in the lead up to the fight that actually like sort of reinforced my pick there. But yeah, Pico being the favorite there didn't really track for me. So just didn't really track for me. But I'm me. So that one I probably should have. That one I feel good about getting right. I probably should have got Shemaev over DDP. Again, probably, but eh. I went back and forth on that one all week, and ultimately just figured since I was going back and forth that much, since I'd said DDP on this program, I just stuck with it. Um, but not great. Let me see. So yeah, again, 7-5. Once again, not a great result there. What did I miss that bothered me? Again, I feel like I should have got close over Barboza. I just didn't want to admit to myself how old Barboza is. But dude looked 40 in this fight, and that's fine. He's about 40. The Andrade fight, I think I said at the time, like, man, if she starts losing to people like Lupe Godinez, we gotta have a serious conversation. That's, yeah, more on that later. More on that later. Um, I should have given Alexander Hernandez more of a shot against Hooper. I'll get to why later, but there's a thing there that I overlooked a little bit in my analysis. All right. So anyway, 7-5 year to date. That's 252 and 83 and 2 with one no contest. I don't like going that close to 500, but don't know what else I can do. Again, there's a few of those I maybe should have got right, but sometimes that's just how it goes. That's the nature of the beast. All right, as for the fights themselves, main event, Khamzat Chimaev defeats Dricus du Plessis via unanimous decision, 50-44 across the boards. I was 49-45. I actually thought DDP pulled out the last round. I know I'm in the extreme minority there. And a lot of people doing there should have been more 10-8s. No, there shouldn't have. Let me talk about that for a minute. You could have been 10-8'd in all the rounds. I mean, Bilal Muhammad threw that out because he's... God. How does he have nothing better to do with his time? I mean this in all... Look, fighters are emotionally fragile and get into these dumb beefs. But, serious... Look, man, I kind of the same thing about DDP. Like, he's just out there trolling on the internet. Like, why? You have a life. Do something meaningful with it. The the BS around fighting and the UFC in particular these days is really starting to wear on my enjoyment of the sport. Um, Bilal also getting booed out of the building just for being there was kind of funny. Um, okay. But here's why there weren't more 10-8s. Because a few weeks ago, the Association of Boxing Commissions voted on some new language that clarifies stuff in scoring criteria. These were all in effect, have been in effect for a few weeks. It was last month, actually. It was longer ago than I said when I just had a couple weeks. It was time. It's fuzzy. It was a while ago. Long enough for more than one or two events to have taken place under the new guidelines. Nothing radical was changed, but they clarified language. And in the new language, they put a premium on damage. They've always shied away from that word. They leaned into it this time, and they specifically said with respect to 10-8s, you cannot give a 10-8 unless significant damage is inflicted. And they have their specific definitions of damage for their scoring criteria, but it's actually specified you need a serious damage component to be awarded a 10-8. There's only one round in this fight where Khamzat did enough damage to warrant it. The third round, everybody gave him a 10-8. That's just where we are with the scoring criteria. Take it up with them if you don't like it. It's actually kind of why I gave the last round to DDP. I thought he had a decently close submission attempt, and I don't think Khamzat did any appreciable damage. So where I'm coming from would not have changed the outcome one bit. Whatever. Disagree with me? Fine. I don't care. So what happened here? A few things. Dricus du Plessis' wrestling defense really struggled here. I think I mentioned it last week. He's not really fought a dedicated takedown artist. That showed up here. His first order takedown defense, the first reaction to it, someone trying to take you down, is okay. But he wrestles under those circumstances like a guy who's just used to having strong hips and letting that be enough. He doesn't really cross-face. He doesn't really pummel. He doesn't really fight for underhooks. His down blocking isn't great. There's a lot of stuff there that he is not kind of going to. And you might be asking yourself, but isn't a really good sprawl enough? Well, it can be. The problem is when you get guys like Khamzat who don't stop at one shot. This used to be a much bigger problem in the MMA space generally, by the way. You go back like 15, 18 years. You had guys with really good sprawls. Chuck Liddell kind of famously. Great sprawl. But if you actually got him down, he struggled a bit. Now, he was actually okay about not letting you consolidate position, but again, okay at it. Other guys like that, like it used to be a thing where, okay, I work really, really hard on my sprawl and a little bit of single leg defense, but if somebody chains a few things together and then gets me down, I'm kind of screwed and we ride out the round. That used to be the predominantly understood way of things. It's kind of reversed over the last little bit. If you look at Jack Della Maddalena by way of example, he used to have fairly poor first order, first reaction takedown defense. He didn't always fight for inside hand position or framing, wasn't always great about sprawling, but he was really good, like once contact was made, about splitting his base, stuffing the head, limp legging, wall walking, all the stuff that you're supposed to do to get out of a bad spot, he was actually pretty good at. He just wasn't good at avoiding being put there in the first place. If you wish to do a compare and contrast on this, watch his fight with Basil Hafez, then watch his fight with Bilal Muhammad. Against Basil Hafez, he's not great at first order stuff. He's not great with his footwork. He's not great with, again, framing and shoving and cross facing and all that stuff that like stops the position from developing to begin with. Pretty darn good at wall walking, underhook pummeling, fence wrestling, but he loses these big swatches of time because he's not able to stop the thing from developing. He's able to get himself out of the hole. And then in the Hafez fight in particular, reclaims enough ground because Hafez kind of gasses and JDM has good offense. That would not have worked against Bilal Muhammad, even the way Bilal fought him. And I know there's been a little bit of debate, like, he didn't try to wrestle enough. He sort of did. There's nuance to that. Bilal got way too much hate for... he just tried to strike with him for way too long. Again, maybe a little, but you're vastly oversimplifying it. But if you look at how Jack Della Maddalena performs in that fight, his first order stuff is light years better. Because his second order stuff was all really good. All he had to do was start working on his immediate reactions. And that turns out to have neutralized a giant chunk of Bilal Muhammad's game. And we'll see how it does against Islam Makhachev, but it's potentially a problem for him. It really is. Back to DDP. First order takedown defense, okay. Not great, okay. Second and third order, like anything that he does after the bad stuff happens or after the initial contact is really not good. Because he's not fighting for underhooks, because he's not pummeling or cross-facing, Khamzat Chimaev doesn't have the best wrestling shot in the world technically. In fact, if you look at some of his shots later in this fight, especially if he's on the back foot, they're pretty bad. He doesn't shoot reactively very well. He really only does well going forward. If you can push him back, and I mean, you can't be recklessly closing, but if you get him trying to shoot off the back foot, he is not nearly as good. Not easy to get him on the back foot, just an observation. But what he is really good at, is once he gets kind of a hold of you, he doesn't get stalled out. Even if you defend the first attempt really well, he keeps driving, he switches, he ducks behind. Like, he's good about wrestling in the way that actually wrestling is done. MMA thinks of wrestling as takedowns. Wrestling is everything that happens until a position is conceded. He's really, really good at keeping active and keeping wrestling until you concede the position. That's what he's really good at. And DDP was not at all prepared to deal with that. The other thing Khamzat Chimaev is really, really good at is position maintenance. He's not the best passer. Pretty good. Not the best. He doesn't have good ground and pound. He's never had good ground and pound. Here it was anemic. That might even be being charitable. But he is really, really good at establishing a bit of control, especially like chest-to-chest pressure, and then maintaining a position once he has got there. He is maybe the best guy in the UFC at that, maybe the best guy in the whole sport. He's really good at that. That is a very legitimate skill. I am not at all trying to downplay it. Here's my problem with it. Other people have been trying to make this case, and they're just doing it badly. Khamzat Chimaev had 21 minutes and 40 seconds of control time in a 25-minute fight. Okay? That's an absurd stat. It's a very good stat. Here's the real problem. He landed like 30 significant strikes over the course of that same time. Uh, let me find the exact number here. Hang on. Okay, yeah, here we go. Yeah, 37. If you have 21 minutes and 40 seconds of control time and you land less than 40 significant strikes in a 25-minute fight, that's a real problem. Everybody gets lost in oh, he landed 529 total strikes. You can discount almost all of those. The exact point of differentiation between a significant strike and an insignificant strike, I admit, little bit of gray area. Okay, we can have some discussion on that. Knees to the thigh and the butt while you're holding a rear waist lock in a ride position and the other guy's on his knees against the fence mean nothing. Those could be removed entirely from the scoring criteria. Nothing would change. They are utterly irrelevant. Now, I'm not saying you can't knee someone hard in the thigh. You can. They're not pleasant. I'm not even saying that, Khamzat had all of Khamzat's knees to the leg were weak. Most of them were. Some of them were pretty good. Few and far between, but some of them. But most could be discounted. Most of his ground strikes are these piddly little punches or hammer fists. Good grief. Valentina Shevchenko has better offense from the mounted crucifix than this guy. That's a problem, people. We need to be honest about it. I'm not saying this was the worst fight I've ever seen. It's not. I'm not saying Khamzat Chimaev didn't deserve to win. He did, by a wide margin. I'm saying there's a lot of people who looked at this and said this is boring. And they're not wrong. And to everyone going, well, if you don't like it, go watch kickboxing. Guys, I watch wrestling. I watch amateur wrestling. They don't let you stall half this much. Have you ever watched an amateur wrestling match, by the way? Look at how often the ref gets involved. You can't stall for 10 contiguous seconds in wrestling. MMA lets you grab a hold of the waist lock, drive someone into the fence, and waste 4.5 minutes. That's the problem here. That's what people are struggling with. That's where the backlash is coming from. And the Khamzat Glazers are out here going, well, just don't watch. You really want to cut the audience any more than we already have? Is that really what we're doing here? Really? You want to be happy Khamzat won? Fine. I don't care. I don't have a dog in the fight. I have long since mostly divorced myself from rooting interest in this godforsaken endeavor. I really have. Watching the reaction to this is what's gotten me a little bit heated. Now, some of the reaction to Khamzat winning is overblown. Sure. He had one boring fight. Suddenly he's a boring fighter. You wouldn't have imagined people saying that Volkanovski's a boring fighter when he kind of just wall installed. That's a bit of an exaggeration. Jose Aldo. And now he's loved as one of the featherweight greats. Guys, don't gaslight me. I was there. Yeah, that's what they said. Again, I was there. I have actual memories, lived history, if you want to throw any sort of relevance towards that, given how unreliable memory and eyewitness testimony is as a general rule, but I was there. Yeah, those were things said. Well, look at what he went on to do. Guys, once again, there is so much revisionism around this, it boggles my mind. I remember the reaction to Volkanovski after the first two Max fights. It wasn't great. There were people arguing he wasn't necessarily the guy who should have won their first fight. Wasn't a strong argument, but there were some people out there making it because everyone loved Max, because Max is great. Then everybody got after him after he won the second Max fight. I thought he won it. But I admit, that whole fight hinges on one round, and boy is that round close. Alexander Volkanovski only got his flowers at the end of his run. The fact that he pulled himself back and regained the belt is a minor miracle. And I get it. Everyone loves Volk. What's not to love about the guy? Seriously. But I'm not doing the revisionism. And secondly, guys like, oh, all of his fights have been bangers. Rewatch Khamzat's first UFC fight. It's not that good. It's interesting because of the level of dominance he displays. Interesting and good are not the same thing. If you're a giant nerd about fighting, there's stuff about this fight with Khamzat and DDP that you can rewatch and you can learn stuff from. That doesn't make it entertaining. This is not an entertaining fight. It really wasn't. There's a bunch of people out there going, but he threw 529 strikes. How are you going to call that boring? Because 90% of those don't matter. More than that. Did not matter at all. Did not matter one iota. That's a problem. MMA in general has a giant stalling problem. It's becoming a thing. I lived through the era of guys who were good at what was called lay and pray. Again, first order takedown defense back in the day, pretty good. But somebody could chain it together, suddenly you're down. Crap. Now my get-ups aren't great, so I'm kind of stuck here. And the guy on top does okay damage, not a lot, but okay, enough to keep the ref out of things, and that burns away around. You guys, if you're newer, you don't understand this, man. Go back and rewatch old fights, and I mean like double-digit UFC stuff. I don't mean like Dark Ages, but like watch John Fitch. Watch Josh Koscheck. Watch, I hesitate to say it, but watch Jake Shields. Like, if you didn't watch those guys live, you don't understand. That got kind of fixed through a variety of reasons, through a variety of things. I mean, people were accusing GSP, you could argue, had some very boring fights. I was critical of GSP when he fought Dan Hardy. A lot of us were. He should have finished that fight. The other big thing that kind of got thrown at Khamzat here, if you got that much control time and you land that many total strikes, and your opponent is as out of his depth in a few specific areas where you excel, you really should have got closer to a finish, if not gotten one. Would be the other sort of gripe here. Like, there were a ton of submission attempts, of submission opportunities that he never attempted. How do you have mounted crucifix for as long as he did and never even threaten a Kimura? I mean, never even tried. The only thing he, sort of tried was an Americana at one point. Like, what are you doing, my man? That's not going to work. He sort of, tried the face crank sub a few times, but never got all that close to it. He's not got that strong a squeeze, I guess. A lot of people assumed after, the Whitaker thing, but no, it turns out that really was just Whitaker's dental health being bad. Sorry, back to the stalling. Because Merab stalls a lot. Everybody loves Merab now. I'm not saying don't root for the guy. I'm saying let's have a sober conversation about stalling. He stalled a lot when he won the belt. Had a fair amount of stalling in the Umar fight. He kind of just does. I know some people, I saw a few people on Twitter do that, so you can stall on the mat and get separated, but you can't circle away and not engage. No, you can't do that either. Merab got warned for that, rightly, after rewatching that fight. He got rightly called out for not engaging at all for long periods of time on the feet. And again, to everyone going, you just don't like wrestling. Watch amateur wrestling. I beg of you, look at how involved the ref is. Nothing penalizes stalling more than wrestling. That includes judo. Because wrestling is fast on a short timetable, so they empower the referees and structure the rules to not allow stalling at all. They also don't let you lock your hands, because that just incentivizes stalling. I'm not saying MMA shouldn't allow locked hands. I'm saying There were 2 separations by the ref in this fight. Frankly, I agreed with both of them. The new rules about this, again, these were voted on, actually do talk about this. You need to be actively advancing to finish the fight. Doesn't mean giving up position. It means if you're going to hold someone's back, drive them onto their knees against the fence, and all you're doing is kneeing the thigh, you're stalling. Throw some punches in. Throw some elbows. Like, there's stuff you can do that is actively working towards a finish. Wasting everyone's time with pointless busy work and pitter-patter shots that an 8-year-old would throw on you is stalling. And huge swaths of time in the average MMA fight, more and more of the average MMA fight, go away under those conditions. It's not helpful to the sport. UFC doesn't care about the health of the sport. I get it. But the number of people who, just because they like Khamzat, are like, no, this is great, this is fine. It's not fine. Now, I'm not saying Khamzat Chimaev's a boring fighter. I think that's a little bit too much. I think his excitement level is overstated. I think he's a very good fighter. He's got problems. His striking is, at best, serviceable. He's got decent power, but he knocked out Gerald Meerschaert. So did Michal Oleksiejczuk on this card. Oleksiejczuk is not a great striker. Meerschaert's defense is not good. He's got some submissions to his name. Yes, Khamzat does. I am not going to say he's a boring fighter. I'm going to say 2 things about this. One, a lot of you have wildly overinflated your recollection of the Kamaru Usman fight. That was not that good. It wasn't bad, but it was like, okay, the Gilbert Burns fight was kind of a barn burner. Yeah, give you that one, 100%. And what he did running over Robert Whittaker was impressive. A little bit less so now that Whittaker looks more and more like he's washed, but still, at the time, impressive. Thumbs up. The Usman fight was not that exciting. Once again, listen to me very carefully. I'm not saying boring. I'm not saying bad. I'm not saying it sucked. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying a lot of people have serious rose-colored glasses about it. It wasn't that good. This fight was not entertaining. Now, that's not the end of the world. Even the number of fighters who have never had an off night is really small. You could probably count them on one hand. Most of them are at lightweight, too. But, like, great middleweight greats have had off. Anderson Silva had several. Izzy had more than a few. Like, that happens. I am not trying to bury Khamzat Chimaev here. I'm really not. I'm just trying to be honest. This was not an entertaining fight. Oh, other thing, by the way, about this. Well, if you didn't like this fight, you're clearly a casual argument. Guys, I don't know if you know this. The largest group, the largest percentage of any sporting endeavor, the largest percentage of any sporting endeavor audience is casual. You think everyone who watches big football games knows the passing stats or which defensive packages work best? Or I'm not even a big football guy. I don't keep up with most of that. I still watch a few games. I am a decidedly casual observer of American football. Because most people watching most things are casual. That's fine. That's how that breaks down. That's the truth of everything. Most people watching a movie are casual. Are casual observers of the movie. This is a thing that, like, Disney and the MCU's learned the hard way. these days when the casuals stopped coming around. This is true of any sporting event. If you don't like American football, I don't care. Pick whatever you want. Unless we're talking about like the nichest of the niche categories. Anything with even approximating a broad market appeal. Most fans, well north of 50% of the observers at any given point in time, are going to be casual observers, not hardcore observers. The casual fan base is actually the most important. WWE found this out recently because their numbers on Netflix are reportedly not great. Why? Because Netflix doesn't lend itself to casual live viewing. It's not kind of what people go there for. Whole other topic. Not getting off on a tangent. So, insulting the casual fan base who makes up the majority of the fan base and the majority of the money being spent on it that keeps everything going, not as much anymore with the UFC, more on that later, seems like a losing strategy, but it makes you feel better. And hey, I am not throwing stones from a glass house here. I have been guilty of this in the past. The difference between me and a lot of the current people, I did it 12 years ago. And I learned, not a good idea, not a good strategy. How big is the casual market? How important is the casual market? Do we all want to be here with like 300 Twitter profiles, maybe one more, well, maybe 10x that watching in total, arguing with each other, and because we can all get lost in the weeds on technique, this somehow makes everything better? No, none of that makes anything better. I've done that. I've been there arguing about small indie wrestling promotions with the 300 other people that know it exists. God, I hate the fact that I used to do that. But I did. And I know how pointless it all is. And now here we're rehashing this again. And here's the other thing, the other conclusion I came to about this. You know the other reason people are starting to react badly? We are at the 5-year point for a bunch of people who came in during the pandemic. We're hitting the 5-year mark for them. 5 years is one of those magic churn numbers for MMA fandom. Right around there is when a majority of the people who found it 5 years ago are losing interest and dropping out. And this is the kind of discourse you start to see at that point. You see people bored, frustrated, or just falling out of love with it, finding reasons to leave. And the small group of people who found it during that time get real bitter at them for leaving. They view it as a betrayal. I have seen this 3 to 4 times in my tenure here. Other people have seen it more than me. That's where we are again. Boy, do I hate this part. Because it's not fun for anyone. And none of the reaction to it is fun. None of the discourse around it is fun. Nothing about it is fun or engaging or good. But that's where we are. And I genuinely think that's a contributing factor to how this is all being discussed. So yeah, Khamzat Chimaev, new middleweight champion. And immediately a bunch of idiots went on Twitter and went, he could totally beat Tom Aspinall. Like, go play in traffic. Preferably not. Preferably just like gain perspective. All right? Please. I beg of you. Gain perspective. I'm not convinced he could beat JDM if he went back down to welterweight. If he went up to light heavyweight, what, is he beating Ankalaev? Is that what we're insinuating here? And yeah, I do kind of assume Ankalaev beats Pereira again at this point, but that's a whole other thing. He just won a belt. Yeah, it was a good win. But can we stop with this, please? Ugh. And, you know, the fact that he then kind of like... So, I'll talk about DDP in a minute or two, I promise. So, Chimaev does his post-fight speech. It's okay. Then they go to talk with DDP because they kind of do that for main events, certainly title fights. And then Chimaev wanders over because he forgot to put over the dictatorial forces that help prop him up. So after Rogan has talked with Duplessis, Chimaev grabs the mic again and says, "Oh, by the way, thank you to Ramzan Kadyrov's fight team and the ruling family of the United Arab Emirates." I think it was the UAE. One of them, forgive me. Like, we're just casually continuing to put over, brutal totalitarian forces. Ugh. I know nobody cares. And it's just starting to get to me a little bit. It mostly because it has nothing to do with the actual sport, the actual fights, and everything to do with a lot of the culture around it, and I'm just it's starting to wear me down a little bit, guys. I just got to be honest about that. So that's where we are with him. His next opponent is yet to be determined. There are a few options. You do have Rainier de Ridder out there, who's got really good intercepting knees, which is a thing you need against someone who shoots a lot, and a pretty good overall grappling game. Might make for a moderately interesting challenge. You've got Anthony Hernandez, who made a really strong case with what he did to Roman Dolidze. Hernandez has been out there beating the drum for himself this last week, going, "Look, I'm not going to give up all those positions. I'm happy to wrestle with him and actually wrestle, not just, give up position and then wait." And, dude, Anthony Hernandez does not slow down. I need to say this about Chimaev. He proved he can go 5 rounds under ideal circumstances. Now, that's not nothing. Clear about that. But it's been said by a lot of people, like, if you have questions about a guy's cardio, your game plan can't be wait. It has to be make them work. Chimaev did not have to work all that hard. Consequently, his cardio held up very well. How does he do when he has to really work the whole time? Well, somebody's got to make him do it the whole time. We'll see if that happens. Hernandez is the kind of guy who would make him do that. Now, Hernandez also kind of, lost a few bad positions against Brendan Allen, and that would... I know he was a little bit messed up in that fight, so I'm not holding it too much against him, but those same positions against Chimaev would go a lot worse. But Fluffy will go 5 rounds, will push a crazy pace, is not at all afraid to fight, will go into you, and, yeah. That's honestly the one I might be most interested in. The other option, we have the upcoming fight between Nasruddin Imavov and Caio Borralho. Sort of depends on how the winner comes out of that looking, when they might want to get Chimaev back in there. Chimaev was making noise about fighting in the UAE because they've got a card for that in, December? Something like that. And, okay, I'm sure they're going to try. We'll see if it comes together. So there's still a few things in motion. Most interested, personally, I think Fluffy Hernandez. I think he gives... There's questions he will ask of Chimaev that I would like to see answered. But still got to wait and see about Imavov and Borralho before we get too far ahead of anything. I do think Rainier de Ridder's a little bit further on the outside. Honestly, I'd still kind of like to see de Ridder and Duplessis, but let's talk about DDP for a second or two here. Yeah, really not a good performance from him. He only landed 13 significant strikes in 25 minutes. That's real bad. That's just really bad. He was not at all prepared for actual wrestling. I don't mean his takedown defense was poor. It wasn't great. And this fight's going to really ruin his percentages. It wasn't super coming in, but you give up 12 of 17 over a 25-minute fight. Like, you're in the hole statistically in a way that you're almost never going to get out of if we're talking about career percentages in the UFC. Giant gap in wrestling through position, in second order grappling, second order takedown defense, second order escapes. A lot of his escapes rely on his strength. I'm not saying you shouldn't leverage his strength, but man, you needed a better idea about how to deal with a lot of stuff. He was not prepared for that. This was a pretty giant fail on a game planning level. I actually think pretty well of his coaching team in general. They usually have him very well prepared. I don't know what was going on here. He was not. I don't know that this is a gap you can close. Like, he's lacking in instinct in circumstances when everything else is being instinctual. I mean, DDP even said it when he was kind of talking about, like, Chimaev wasn't super strong, but he was positionally ahead of him. And you don't need to be the stronger fighter if you've got great positioning, great tactical awareness in your wrestling, and really good pressure. That's what Chimaev had. And those are all big things to overcome. Here's a couple of things about this going forward. So one of the other reasons I kind of want to see him fight DeRitter, DeRitter will do some similar things to Chimaev. If you want to see whether or not he can beat someone who does a lot of what Chimaev does, you would make him and Fluffy. But I don't know. I think Fluffy presents the most interesting challenge to Chimaev at the moment, so that's why I'm a little bit less interested in Fluffy and DDP. But if they wind up going with Imavov or Bahalio, then I think Fluffy and DDP kind of is where they're going to go. This was a really bad loss for DDP. It's probably not. He's probably not going to get back to the belt. Like, the number of things he'd have to do and skills he'd have to obtain to be able to handle what Chimaev brings to him or would bring again in a rematch is really long. And I don't know how reasonable it is to think he could do it. There's other guys who, now that you have a much better look at Chimaev's game over 5 rounds, are going to be able to build around that. Guys like Craig Jones or any of the guys who do training and conceptualize stuff about a lot of fence wrestling and whatnot, you got a big look at what Chimaev does here. Guys with better game planning, better wrestling instincts are going to be figuring him out based on this. Not saying right away, but part of what made Chimaev really, really hard to deal with was the lack of tape. Was not seeing a lot of what he did across different positions, not seeing a lot of his strategies. You're getting more and more of that, and that's how you get figured out. It's one of the major components of fighters falling off is other people just seeing enough of them to figure out how to deal with them. And I think this will wind up being the start of that for Chimaev. I'm not saying he's going to lose his next fight, but believe me, not what I'm saying. But just kind of looking forward, So, yeah, that's kind of where we are. DDP's in a rough spot. I don't know what he's going to do. But this was a bad loss for him. This was a bad loss. All right, that is enough on that. I talked way too long about that because, again, the discourse around this fight has bothered me for reasons previously enumerated. Let's move on. Co-main event. Lerone Murphy knocks the stuffing out of Aaron Pico with a spinning back elbow, 3:21 of the first round. Look, I picked Murphy. I'm not surprised he won. Little surprised it was this. Lerone Murphy doesn't have a lot of finishes, especially in his UFC time. In his UFC time, he's got what? This and Makwan Amirkhani. Oh, no, he stopped Ricardo Ramos. Okay. So 3 finishes in his entire UFC run. That's not great if we're looking at just finishing rates, but he's undefeated. And when he actually knocks you out, boy, you stay knocked out. That knockout of Makwan Amirkhani was pretty brutal. He intercepted him with a knee. This one, oh boy. So Murphy, we've seen him use elbows to deal with guys who really try to pressure him before. He did it a lot against Josh Emmett. Um, and it's not like Aaron Pico didn't have some success. Again, he pursues the fight. Good wrestling. He actually hit a really nice double leg. Um, his body work is really good. He does this thing where he kind of throws a real long jab, then steps forward to almost square with his right leg while throwing a right hand and then follows with a left hook to the body. It's a little bit of a boxing combination. It's a good one. The problem is like squaring up, not all that great. So there's some nuance to the footwork there that you don't do in boxing, but he's doing in MMA because they're not exactly identical. But so he kind of shows that, brings his right foot up, gets a little square, but as he's doing that, he fades to Murphy's left. And Murphy sees him move that way and spins and elbows him in the head and knocks him out badly. I mean, real bad. That was bad knockout. So Murphy then said he wants a title shot. Probably going to get it. Look, I know Volkanovski had kind of been banging the drum to fight Movsar Evloev because he thought Movsar deserved it. But, Murphy just leapfrogged Evloev with this. There's no doubt about it. So Volk's down for fighting him. I think he said in December. Murphy will clearly accept that fight. I'd like to see it. They're both very technical. They're both good fighters. So, thumbs up. Good fight. This was a rough loss for Pico. He's still young. He's only 28. He's clearly, he's an aggressive fighter. He needs to find out how to temper that. Use it, harness it, but not make it be quite as predictable. Because, man, when he's had a couple of real tough losses. And a couple of bad knockouts. They're not every fight. I don't think he's actually that chinny. I think that would be a misappropriation of the term. Like, he lost his debut being too aggressive, got caught in a guillotine. Not uncommon. Wins 4 fights. Henry Corrales knocked him out. And Adam Borics badly hurt him. His next stoppage loss was the shoulder injury to Jeremy Kennedy. Like, I don't hold that against him. He had a long winning streak between those 2 losses. But yeah, this was bad. He's, like I said, he's still young. He's only 28. Everyone uses this as an excuse to start memeing on Bellator again. Clearly Bellator fighters aren't that good. Meanwhile, MVP casually beats a top 10 middleweight while moonlighting in the weight class. More on that later. No, like some of these guys are a little bit aftermarket. We're not getting the best of Pitbull. No one's in dispute about that. I would have favored, I think I said this last week, I actually would have favored Pico to beat Evloev. Not huge, but I would have picked him. I think the way Evloev fights plays into how Pico fights. Those two would have been just banging into each other because they're both kind of forward wrestling-based fighters, and Pico mixes in his boxing real well. That's a much more winnable fight for him. Not that Evloev's an easy fight, but stylistically, he could have won that fight. Murphy was always going to be a tough fight for Pico, especially doubly so on short notice. You need time to look at Murphy's tape and to figure out how he works. Because moving into him reliably is a bad way to fight. You do have to go after him. Not saying don't. But you have to be craftier about it. Your entries into striking exchanges have to be not predictable. He actually did a really good job of backing Murphy to the fence. Like I said, mixed in his wrestling a little bit for as long as the fight lasted. Hit some really nice body shots because he's got nasty body punches. It's not that there was no good here from Aaron Pico. There was. But Murphy was just ready in a general sense for the basics that Pico brought and lined up a really nice kill shot. So good good win for Lerone Murphy, man. Probably punched his ticket to a title shot. Frankly, he's got a pretty good shot at beating Volk. I don't know how I'm gonna pick that one. I gotta think about that, assuming it even happens. But you would be foolish to discount him in that fight. Very foolish. All right, next up, welterweight, excuse me, because we had two of these in a row. Carlos Prates with a spinning back elbow to knock out Jeff Neal, 4:59 of the first. Good grief. So this was a good fight for as long as it lasted. Prates did a lot of circling, some pretty decent calf kicks. Both guys southpaw, which changed the weaponry a little bit for both of them. Neal, because he has a lot more boxing-centric style, once he got into punching range, had bits of success, had a couple of nice combinations, but he could never really consistently corral Prates on the fence for long periods of time, and he needs time to work. And Prates was good about spinning out, circling off the fence, using longer range weaponry, and then once Neal started getting into the pocket a bit more reliably, Prates decided to greet him with elbows. He chopped in a nice little tomahawk elbow right before the finish, actually. Hit him with one of those. Then spun through, crack elbow to the side of the head, drops Jeff Neal. All she wrote. Good rebound for Prates after the Gary loss, which, he actually salvaged a little bit of his height by the end of that fight. So, good one there. He wants to fight in Rio coming up, because that's coming up, and the UFC doesn't go to Brazil as often as they used to. Still out there smoking and drinking, because he's just doing what he does, and, need to say this for the fighting nerds. That camp, one of the things they do well is they don't have a specific style. Their ethos seems to be, bring your weirdness. Bring you. Bring the unique expression in combat that you bring, and we will figure out ways to make it work. We'll give you the best shot at it working. Because Prates doesn't fight like Bahalia, who doesn't fight like Houfi, who doesn't fight like Silva. They're all from the same camp, and there's nothing really identifiably stylistically similar about them. The goal there seems to be, do the right homework on your opponent, but we're going to figure what you want to do, what you're good at doing, and we're going to really work hard at shoring up your faults and then making your expression work. Because trying to fit a square peg in a round hole just seems like a losing proposition. So, okay, you're not much of a wrestler. We'll help you with your takedown defense, but you like to be the long-rangey striker, Houfi. We'll figure out how to help make that work for you. Reliably. There's something to that, it seems. So, good for them, man. Tough loss for Jeff Neal. He'd been out for a little bit. Good win for Prates to get back on the winning side of things. Middleweight up next. Michael Page defeats Jared Cannonier via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. First two rounds, a lot of Michael Page stuff. He moves, he snipes, he sort of drops Cannonier. One of them was more of a trip. But one of them was pretty clean. Then in the third round, he overcommits, trying a Superman punch, kind of gets his legs kicked out on it. Cannonier gets on top, and Cannonier rides out the round there, but Cannonier's not much of a threat to finish on the ground. So, not the best fight in the world, but Page does enough showboating and has enough punctuated moments to kind of keep the crowd interested. He says he's interested in fighting, was it Prates he said he'd fight in Rio? He'd have to go back down to welterweight for it, but you know what? I'd be down for that fight. Go for it. Tough loss for Cannonier, but he kind of is who he is at this point. You know, he's north of 40. He's still got ability, but man, Page is always a bad matchup for him. Cannonier really kind of needs you to be slower than he is, or at least comparable in speed. If you're not, some of his game struggles. And Michael Page has never been a slow fighter. And kicking off the main card, we had Tim Elliott choking out Kai Asakura with a mounted guillotine choke, 4:39 of the second. Decent first round for Asakura, landed some pretty good right hands, both to the body and to the head, but couldn't really dissuade Elliott. And then in the second round, Elliott got a little bit better read on the offense coming from Asakura, landed a few overhand lefts because Asakura wasn't expecting them, gets a takedown, and his grappling was just superior. So Elliott, another guy who'd been out for a while, but got a win, so, you know, good for him. That's the main card. Not a bad card. Again, Page and Cannonier I don't think is worth revisiting, but in the moment wasn't a bad fight. The main event, again, not a lot of entertainment value there. 2 back-to-back spinning back elbow knockouts, though, was just wild. I mean, I remember the time we had 2 Suluev stretches on a card in close proximity to each other, and that was pretty nutty, too. All right, as for the prelims, Baisongor Susurkayev defeated Eric Nolan via rear naked choke, 2:01 of the second. Nolan, normally a welterweight, took this on short notice and actually performed well. He pretty badly hurt Susurkayev at the end of the first. So good, didn't perform badly, but his knee kind of got torn up with a couple of leg kicks in the second, and that really messed him up. So Susurkayev was signed from the Contender Series. He fought that same week. Got a stoppage via front kick to the body. I gotta say this about the Contender Series, man. So they made anytime the new season of the Contender Series starts, the first episode, the UFC makes a big play like we've got standards here. So they only sign like 1 guy, maybe 2. And Susurkayev was the only guy signed from the first night of the Contender Series. That, like, fake standard is going to go out the window next week. Inevitably, they sign like 80% of all winners from any given season of the Contender Series. That's just how the math bears out to this point. Even if they don't sign you, the number of people who lose on the Contender Series or win and don't get signed, who then at some point in the next 4 months get a short notice deal to fight with the UFC anyway, is quite high. It's a puppy mill. That's all it is. Let's not call it anything else, please. So, okay win for Susurkayev. Got some, I am not sold on him as some big future deal. He's got good parts to his game. Don't get me wrong. But very untested. Put it like that. Also at middleweight, Michal Oleksiejczuk TKO Gerald Meerschaert, 3:03 of the first. Both men southpaw. Oleksiejczuk shows the overhand left a few times. Meerschaert keeps ducking to avoid it, so he goes to the uppercut, like you do. Punches him, drops him. He drops him a couple of times before he gets the finish. The Fighting Nerds seem to be doing Oleksiejczuk some good, so there's that at least. Strawweight, Lupe Godinez defeats Jessica Andrade via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Jessica Andrade is washed. In a sane world, she wouldn't still be fighting. But because fighters are not good with their money, in general, and her former manager embezzled most of her money, so she's still fighting because she has to make a living. Really sucks. Because she's a former champion, she should be doing okay financially, and instead, well, turns out not so much. She's been figured out at this point. She's slower than she used to be, and she was never all that fast. Her punching is still her big weapon. She added a few low kicks here. Like, she really just needed years ago to have figured out proper inside leg kicks in particular, scoring up the opponent and then stepping in and following. Godinez just did better boxing through the first couple of rounds and then started getting hit more in the third, but not enough to get stopped and saw it out. Not a lot there. Alexander Hernandez, next up, lightweight, defeats Chase Hooper, TKO, punches at 458 of the first round. Hooper looks okay early. He kind of got his kick game going, some long-range punches, but he stops managing distance all that well. Hernandez gets him a little more into boxing range, draws out a left hand from Hooper that doesn't land, counter right, crushes him. Here's the big piece of my analysis on Chase Hooper that I should have given more credence to here. One, his takedown game is not great. Still working on it. Two, his striking defense is bad. Now, the statistics on him are badly warped by by one in particular of his fights at featherweight. Which one was it? It was Steve something or other. That's Steve Garcia. He's kind of good. Steven Peterson. He took a lot of abuse in that fight, and it skewed his numbers. He did lose to Steve Garcia too, by the way, but the Peterson fight was the one that messed with his striking defense numbers. He's worked on it a little bit, but it's still a gap. He also doesn't seem to be quick. Like, there's not a lot of fast movement there. And that caught him here pretty badly. I mean, the technique involved with what Hernandez did was nice. If you're open stance, if you can draw out someone to overextend throwing the power hand, the counter, your power hand counter is right there. And that's what got him here. So, not saying that, there's nothing to what Hernandez was doing, but Hooper's physical strength is, again, kind of coming along, work in progress. His kicking game, because he's long, is a nice idea, but he's got to put more oomph into it, or you're not going to dissuade anyone from closing distance. And his defense needs help, other than being long. On the earlier prelims, Drakkar Klose defeated Edson Barboza via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Yeah, Barboza's washed. He's almost 40. He's fought everybody. He's taken an inadvisable amount of damage over his career. Like, that dude got beat up by Khabib. He got beat up by Kevin Lee. He got beat up by Tony Ferguson. I could go on. But he fought everybody at lightweight. He moved down to featherweight, and he fought some tough fights there, too. I have nothing but respect for his career. But he is past it, and he is looking his age. And that's mostly what happened here. Women's flyweight next. Karine Silva defeated Diani Barboza via unanimous decision, 29-20 across the board. And commentary lost their minds over this one. Idiots. Daniel Cormier is useless. Almost completely useless. So, Barboza gets the first round. Not in dispute. The question we look at is, what do we happen for, rounds 2 and 3, right? Silva does the more damaging work in rounds 2 and 3. Oh, but Barboza had control. Doesn't matter. Damage. Damage is king. Silva landed the more damaging strikes in those 2 rounds. And then for Cormier to be like, well, she clearly lost the third. The third was the round Silva most clearly won. Either you misspoke, in which case shut up, or you're that stupid, in which case shut up. Everyone there was talking about, Silva needs a finish in the third. And meanwhile, the scroll on the side of all the social media responses, everyone has Silva winning the second except the 3 boobs talking into a mic. I'm not even going to throw John Anik under that bus. He seemed to be kind of cool about it, but Rogan and DC is, useless. Absolutely useless. And kicking everything off, I already mentioned the outcome, but Joseph Morales defeated Alibi Idris via triangle choke, 304 the second. Idris is just really used to being the guy going forward. When Morales made him go backwards, better boxing. Some nice stuff on the ground, classic triangle. Turned to the side, hooked the leg because he didn't want to get slammed because he's smart. This starts Morales' second stint in the UFC. He went 1-2 prior. When was that? Like 17, I think it was. 18, sorry. He came in 17, beat Roberto Sanchez. Then his next two fights, his next fight after that, he fights Davis and Figueiredo, and yeah, he got stopped, but, Figgy in 2018 was a force in nature. Then he drops a split decision to Eric Shelton, and then the UFC cuts him because they were renovating flyweight. So, under other circumstances, I don't think he would have been cut there. I think he would have got at least one more, but he's back, so, good on him. And yeah, that was it. It was UFC 319. A card that I think was better on paper than it was in execution in a lot of ways, the main event in particular. I got hyped for it, and it let me down. There was no fight of the night. Should tell you a little something about the night. So they gave out 4 performance bonuses. 1-2 Khamzat Chimaev, generous. Lerone Murphy, duh. Carlos Praches, duh. And Tim Elliott. They really wanted to reward the main card. I would have gone Hernandez over Elliott, personally. But that's just me. So, full report, MMAZone411Mania.com. Give it a read if you're so inclined. I always appreciate when people are able and willing to do that. So, thank you. All right. Let's... Oh, jeez. Sorry. I need to buy a new mouse at some point. And mine is... I bought a relatively inexpensive one about a year ago, and that's about the life cycle for how much I use them. So I gotta invest in a better one this time around. So let's clear that out. Okay, that is set. That's not what I needed. Sorry, this is taking a minute or two of setup, and that went longer than I wanted it to. The preview shouldn't take too long. Okay, UFC on ESPN plus 115. This will take place at an ungodly early hour. The early prelims start at 1 a.m. my time, so yeah, I'm not sleeping. The UFC is in Shanghai, that's why the early start time. And I said I was kind of struggling to find a lot of stuff that I'm really interested in this card. That's still kind of true, but I may have been a tad down on it last time. It's still got problems, mind you, but it didn't quite deserve as much negativity as I threw its way. Like I said, it's got issues. And I'm going to be honest because I always am. But I don't think it's quite the wasteland I sort of said last week. It's just, it's very, very regional. And I'm always iffy on those cards. So, main event, light heavyweight, Zhang Mingyang, the great Chinese hope, against Johnny Walker, the meme fighter. They're setting up Zhang here for a big win in his home country because light heavyweight is a giant wasteland. And this guy has a lot of finishes. In fact, has he ever gone the distance? He's never won going the distance. He's been 3 rounds once in 2017. So 1 decision fight in his 25 fights. He's on a long winning streak, actually. His last loss was in 2019. That's, hang on, how many fights? 12? Yeah. 12. Yeah, 12. 3-0 in the UFC. Again, this is clearly a guy they're trying to build up, so they put him in his local market. They give him a very winnable fight that's also allegedly high profile enough because Johnny Walker, doesn't he still have name value? I don't think so, but, that's just me. Walker hasn't won since 2023 when he beat Anthony Smith. He fought Magomed Ankalaev twice and got lucky with an illegal knee in one, and then got knocked out in the second one, and Volkan Oezdemir knocked him out last time. That was June of last year, so he's been off for a bit. The UFC knows what they're doing here. They're trying to set this guy up. At a minimum, I'm not going to jinx it. Because if I come out here and say, because the commentary is going to say it when we get to this card, Zhang Mingyang only been the distance once. Johnny Walker hasn't been the distance in however long. How long has it been? Just for the sake of curiosity. He went 3 rounds with Anthony Smith. He went 5 rounds with Thiago Santos. So the dude's been to decision 4 times in his career. Again, 31 fights, 4 decisions. They're going to say that. They're going to say Zhang's only been 1, so 5 decision wins between these 2 guys, their entire careers. You're going to jinx it, and these 2 weirdos are going to go the distance in like a terrible fight. I know it. Because I'm misanthropic about this stuff. Logically, this is put together because Johnny Walker gets knocked out in funny ways, and Zhang Mingyang hits pretty hard. But it would just be the UFC's luck for that to backfire on them the way it does. I can't say a majority of the time, but it feels like a majority of the time because it always gets brought up and then it always backfires when people bring it up. So, still going with Zhang, but yeah. I'm not exactly thrilled for that. I'm not excited about light heavyweight. Anything about light heavyweight. Co-main event, this is probably the best fight on the card. At featherweight, Brian Ortega and Aljamain Sterling. We're going to get some nice grappling exchanges out of these two. I'm not sold on Sterling at featherweight. I know he beat Calvin Kattar, but Kattar's kind of shot. He lost to Movsar Evloev. That was a good fight. And Ortega doesn't scramble like Evloev. I get it. Ortega does a bit more boxing than Evloev. And Ortega is much more of a submission threat. Evloev hasn't finished anyone in the UFC. Meanwhile, Brian Ortega, I'm not saying he's got some decision wins to his credit, but not known for it. Ortega's coming off the loss to Diego Lopez. I can see this going either way. Start there. I think Sterling is going to try and force a lot more grappling than Lopez did. Lopez was happy to just punch Brian Ortega in the face. Sterling doesn't have hands like that. He's got good kicks, though. Like, Sterling at bantamweight in particular had a sort of similar frame to his opponents that John Jones had to a lot of the other guys at light heavyweight. So if you look at Aljamain Sterling's sort of philosophy on striking, he takes a lot from John Jones. A lot of single shot, high variance is sort of the ethos he goes with there. I don't think that works as well for him at featherweight. Brian Ortega gets hit a lot. Again, you could go either way with this. What are the odds? I'm curious. Yeah, the odds are fairly decently with Sterling. Again, I can see... I gotta asterisk this one. I hate to do it, but... Let me go with Sterling for the moment, and I'm gonna look back through their most recent fights. I need to double check something on that. Because I don't know the last time Sterling fought a jiu-jitsu guy like Ortega. And the last time he fought like a good wrestler, He got outdone by Evloev, but okay. Next up, heavyweights: Sergey Pavlovich and Waldo Cortez Acosta. They're really trying to make Cortez Acosta happen. So he's on a decent winning streak, 5 fights. Um, I don't know, man. That Spivak fight was dreadful. So was the Despain fight, but Pavlovich has long arms. He still hits really hard. Part of the problem with Pavlovich, he's going to run into the jab a lot. And Waldo has a pretty good jab. His problem is like all his offense is either a pretty decent jab or like that baseball overhand right, or he tries to out-wrestle you. I don't think he can out-wrestle Pavlovich. I think his offense is a little too predictable, and Sergey Pavlovich hits really hard. Pavlovich had a 2-fight losing streak. He got stopped by Tom Aspinall, who doesn't. And then he lost to Alexander Volkov when Volkov did a really good job of like long-range, methodical striking. Busted him up with a jab mostly. He rebounded by beating Jairzinho Rozenstruik. That's not nothing. Wasn't a great fight, but Pavlovich hasn't, or excuse me, Cortez Acosta hasn't beaten anyone on the level of Pavlovich. I'm still going to think Pavlovich is a decent heavyweight, so I'm going to go with him. But this might be a little bit do or die for him. It's not quite do or die for Cortez Acosta. He's taking a pretty big step up in class from the guys he's been fighting to someone who's been near the very top of the division. Let's see. Flyweight next, Sumudarji and Kevin Borjas. So Sumudarji just broke a 3-fight losing streak when he got a split decision over Mitch Raposo. He's fighting in China because he is one of the local boys. He's slightly favored here. Let me look at Borjas. 10-3. 1-2 in the UFC. His first 2 UFC fights were Josh Van and Alessandro Costa. A little bit of a rough stretch. He beat Ronaldo Rodriguez. Or is that Ronaldo Rodriguez? Uno momento. Ronaldo Rodriguez. He is Mexican. This is a close fight. I can see why the UFC is going with like Borjas is not a bad fighter, but you know, only 3 fights into his UFC run. Sumudarji's been here for a minute. Like he's got how many UFC fights? Yeah, 8, 4-4 in that time. And he just broke a 3-fight losing streak. He lost to Matt Schnell, Tim Elliott, and Charles Johnson. 2 of those are, I'm not going to hold too much against him. Because Tim Elliott, still pretty good, and Charles Johnson, still pretty good. But you get subbed by Matt Schnell. And again, the decision over Mitch Raposo was split. So the odds are slightly with Sumudarji. I don't know that I respect that. Let me asterisk this real fast. I'm going with Borjas, but I want to remind myself of his last fight. So almost certainly sticking with Borjas just because I am. But next up at welterweight, we have Kiefer Crosby and I'm going to butcher this name. Okay. Tayilake? Yeah, I think Tayilake Nururaji? Nururaji. I think Nururaji. So So Netaraji, technology actually does reverse those, so I believe Netaraji would be the family name. He's 11-1 with one no contest. This is his UFC debut. He's been out of action for about a year. Not sure why. He had 3 fights fall out between now and then, so yeah, that's the thing. Crosby. Let's have a look. Here, one of those. He's 10-5, 0-2 in the UFC. Losses to Kevin Jousset and Sam Patterson. Was supposed to fight Song Kanan on this. Okay, so I think Neraraji is stepping in to fill in for Song Kanan. I would have favored Song. To be clear about that. I might favor Neraraji too. I'm just not been terribly impressed with Crosby. Yeah, let me go with Neraraji. The odds agree. Okay, next up, what do we got next? At lightweight, Mahashate and Gage Young. So let's take a quick look here. So Mahashate 10-4, 2-3 in the UFC. Lost to Rafa Garcia and missed weight. Lost to Vyacheslav Borshov. Beat Gabriel Benitez. Lost to Nicholas Mata. So very up and down. Gage Young 9-3. Lost his UFC debut to Evan Elder. That was a weird fight. Those two were just, if memory serves, those two were just very similar. Tough to say here, actually. Odds are almost at a pick. I'm a little lean towards Young. I'll respect that. Yeah, Mahashate has not really hit for me. Flyweight, Lonnie Kavanaugh and Charles Johnson. So Johnson coming off a loss to Ramazan Temirov. He was not happy with the decision, but I thought it was correct. 4-fight winning streak before that. Kavanaugh is what, 1-2 in the UFC? No, I'm thinking of somebody else with that one. Lonnie Kavanaugh is 9-0, 2-0 in the UFC. I know who I'm confusing him with. Okay. Let's see. 2 wins in the UFC. Jose Ochoa and Felipe Dos Santos. Getting a moderate step up to Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson is a tough out. At a minimum. The odds do like Kavanaugh. I might like Johnson. I don't know. The question is like, do I think Johnson's really started to fall off? He has hit 35. He's got a tough style to win a lot of decisions with. It's not that he doesn't do good work, but it's a little bit too spaced out. You know what? I'll take a flyer on Johnson. Hang on, what's the age gap? So Johnson's like 35. 34. Just close to 35, and I did say like. Kavanaugh, 26. 9-year gap. Does that change your opinion? Not enough. This is kind of reading to me one of those fights where the young, talented guy comes up against the old vet, but he's not quite ready for the old vet. That's kind of what this reads to me. I'll stick with Johnson. Next up, I believe we have Rongju. Yeah, Rongju and Austin Hubbard at lightweight. So Rongju fought his way back to the UFC, lost in a road to UFC finale, but did beat Cody Steele his last time out. This is his second stint in the UFC. Went 1-2 his first time with losses to Kazula Vargas and Ignacio Bahamondes. He did beat Brandon Jenkins in there. He got cut because he missed weight twice. More than just like losing that fight with Bahamondes. He missed weight for the Jenkins fight, then he missed weight again for the Bahamondes fight. Yeah, that tracks. Austin Hubbard, 1-3 in his last 4 losses to Kurt Holloway, and then 2 split decisions to Alexander Hernandez and Markel Medeiros. There was an argument for him in the Hernandez fight, I thought, not so much the Medeiros fight. Look, both these guys kind of do the thing of they punish you for trying to take them down a lot. So who's going to do a better job of kind of not, thumping away at the other guy? The odds are really with Rongju. Jeez. Hubbard has not looked all that great his last couple of fights. He looks a little shop worn at this point, which is weird. I don't think he's an old guy. How old is he? 33. Not old, but it might be wearing on him. It might be starting to wear on him a little bit. All right. I'll go with Rongju. Okay, middleweight next. Michel Pereira. Stuck on the prelims over here, man. They are not pleased with him. And Kyle Dawkins back in the UFC. Pereira, 2-fight losing streak to Anthony Hernandez and Abus Magomedov. I thought Pereira could be a little bit of a problem at middleweight. He was, and people are starting to get a feel for him. The question is like, how good is Dawkins? He got cut from the UFC after losing to Eric Anders. He's won 4 fights since, all in Cage Fury. Respectable organization. 3 of those have been finishes. I'm not anti-Dawkins, but I think Pereira still has a bit to give at middleweight. I'll go with him, and Dawkins, I don't know. Tough matchup. Tough matchup for him. Dawkins is not a super athlete. If he can endure the first round and a half of Pereira's weirdness, this will go bad for Pereira down the stretch, but I think he's good enough to make the first bit work for him. Featherweights next. Yi Zha and Weston Wilson. So, I believe Yi Zha is the biggest favorite on the card. Yes, indeedy. Minus 1,400, give or take. So, Yi Zha is 25-5. Only 28 years old. 0-2 in the UFC. So he got to the finals of a road to UFC tournament, and then lost to Jeong-Young Lee. Then he fought his way back through a road to the UFC tournament, lost to Gabriel, won that season or that tournament, then lost his first fight to Gabriel Santos. So he's getting another shot here against Weston Wilson. And Wilson has gone 17-9 as a pro. 1-2 in the UFC. Losses to Joe Anderson Brito and Gian Silva. He beat Yeka Saragi, which I don't rate too highly of as a win. This will be at featherweight. Yeah, the odds are with Yi Zha. I'm inclined to respect that in this case. I wouldn't be comfortable holding them. Look, man, this level of MMA, I wouldn't be comfortable with odds that wide if I had to pay out on it, but I do understand Yijia being the favorite. Alrighty. Bantamweight next. We have Xiaolong and Xiongyu Yu. So, Xiaolong, yeah, 27-9, 1-1 in the UFC. Lost to uh, Chung Ho Lee, and he beat Kwang Lee his last time out. It was a split decision. Oh, I remember this guy. I remember that road because that was a road to UFC fight basically that he with Lee. Okay, and then he beat Kwang Lee, which was a good win. Now he's fighting against Su Yong Yu. This is actually a decent little fight. Again, it's hidden on the prelims, but because good old Jiu-Jitsu, 15-3, 2 no contests, 2-0 in the UFC, wins over Barangong Yelesi and then AJ Cunningham. These two are probably going to scrap it out. Like, this is not a bad fight. I don't know how to lean on this one. Probably you. Zhao's a very high activity fighter, but he's been susceptible to the grappling, and that's kind of what Yu does. So I will go with the South Korean. That'll go over well if he wins. Not a lot of racists in China, right? And kicking everything off at light heavyweight, because of course there's 2 of them. Ordan Satabaldiev and Dr. Nurgojai. Making me type out one of those is just mean. So Nurgojai had a little bit of hype coming into his UFC debut, was undefeated, then lost. Lost the UFC debut to Brendan Ribeiro. Yeah, he missed weight and then he got Kimura'd. He was on top and he got Kimura'd, swept, and then not a good loss. Satabaldiev is Kyrgyzstan. I don't think that's the correct name for people of Kyrgyzstan. Forgive me, I don't remember what their citizens prefer to be called. It's escaping me. He's 9-1. Also 0-1 in the UFC. Lost a debut to Martin Bidet. That was on short notice, up a weight class. He's normally a light heavyweight, so now he's in his proper weight class. He struggled with Bidet because Bidet's a big, strong heavyweight who's no longer with the UFC because they don't like him. Let me have a quick look here. What are the odds on this one? Do I have odds on this one? I am not seeing them. Oh, wait, nope, there it is. Yeah, the odds are with Satabaldiev, and after his performance against Bidet, again, even losing up at heavyweight on short notice, I respect it. I will agree with that. So that's the card. And yeah, man, getting Kimura'd like that by Nurgojai was not a good look. But we're dealing with both guys still fairly junior in their MMA careers professionally. So anything could happen. Who knows? That's the card. I will have your coverage Saturday morning, technically, depending on where you are. No, I don't know. Hawaii maybe would still be the day before. Would still be Friday. Pretty much anywhere else, like even on the west coast of the U.S., it'd be midnight. So yeah, I will have coverage of that. That's going to be a long night for me. On the plus side, it does free me up Saturday for a thing. because I've got a birthday party to go to on Saturday, so that'll be fun. I'll be very tired, but I can live with that. Until I can't. So, Saturday morning, if any of you are awake, MMAZone411mania.com, stop by, say hello. I know you won't, but I say it anyway, so you know that I appreciate it. Alrighty. Okay, here we go. So let's talk about the only news item that I've got on here, the only one I think that matters. So the UFC announced their new broadcast deal. We were all thinking Netflix, right? Maybe split between Netflix and ESPN or something similar. And then lo and behold, no. The UFC will be exclusively in the United States with CBS/Paramount. Okay. They also announced there will be, okay, this gets a little bit dicey. The official announcement indicates no pay-per-views. The numbered events will take place mostly on CBS. So they will be broadcast there. And if you have a Paramount Plus subscription, you'll get it all. There's 2 tiers to Paramount Plus at the moment, one with ads, one without. One is like $8, one is like $13, so that one thing will get you everything the UFC has to offer in the United States. The end of pay-per-view, in theory, big deal. Now, Dana White came out and said, well, maybe we can still do one-off or, pay-per-views like that. Because if we ever get a big enough star, then charging everybody $80 a pop for it is just too tempting an offer to pass up. But we don't actually have too many stars right now that are worth all that much or that can draw that much money, so, I mean, he didn't say that in so many words, but we all know what he said. Oh, I didn't mention the financial end of it, because, yeah, we know the numbers. Paramount is paying the UFC $7.7 billion over the next 7 years for this. That's an average of $1.1 billion per year. Now, it doesn't actually work out to $1.1 billion a year in real terms. It's a little bit less the first year and then a little bit more the last year, like it does kind of graduate through. Not by enough to make a giant difference for the purposes of operation or even discussion, but I do want to say out loud, the deal isn't strictly $1.1 billion per year. It's more like probably a little bit closer to $1 billion the first year and like 1.2 the last, something equivalent to that, and it graduates a little bit up the ladder as you go on. That's more than the UFC was originally looking for. If you'll recall, they were looking for $1 billion a year. They're getting a little more than that. Paramount is paying through the nose for this thing. They're paying more for this than almost anything else on their slate combined over a similar time period. They're not paying this much for South Park. They're not paying this much for Premier League. Now, Premier League in the United States doesn't do as well, so I get it, but I think they're paying more for this than what they're paying for their segment of the NFL. I'd have to double check that because don't quote me on that one. But it's certainly, I think, at least comparable. It's a mind-boggling amount of money. It's a mind-boggling amount of money. It's an increase to the UFC's annual revenue of $600 million, give or take. Yeah, they almost doubled what they were getting from Disney/ABC/ESPN. I mean, Disney owns all those, but you know what I mean. Yeah, they almost doubled that. So, a few things to talk about here. Where do we want to start? Let's start with the one that is going to get the least amount of traction and is going to impact things the least overall. Let's talk fighter pay. It's not going up by anything approximating an appreciable amount in a percentage. system. Like, you don't under... So, a few people... You know what? Let me back up half a step before I get to fighter pay. It needs to be said out loud that the UFC's decision to bulldoze forward during the pandemic has paid enormous dividends with their cultural footprint. Now, I am not here to relitigate COVID, okay? I'm really not. I was opposed to the UFC trying to bulldoze forward without having proper safety protocols in place. Once they put them in place and got sanctioning, fine. That's all that could reasonably be asked of them. I know there's a bunch of people who do the very existence of these things is morally reprehensible. I'm not one of them. You can find it dubious that the state of Florida decided that MMA and pro wrestling were essential and given exemptions to stay open. Yeah, professional wrestling is not essential to anything, first of all. Now, you can also argue how much of the lockdowns were actually necessary and effective. And again, I am not here to relitigate it. I am simply saying I don't feel like taking a moral stance on that. I had my issues with it logistically, and I certainly have my opinions on the whole thing. But getting into that means trying to relitigate a lot of stuff, and I don't want to do that. You don't want to hear me do that, so I'm going to leave it aside. I'm only talking about the functional reality here. The UFC made a really, really big push to get back up and running during a time when everything else was shut down. They gained a lot of exposure to audiences that would not otherwise be all that interested because there was pretty much no competition for anything in the live sporting category. They also leaned into the right-wing side of the political spectrum around this time, and I don't think that's an accident. Now, there was already a little bit of a right-leaning thing to them, not a huge one, but a little bit. Look, the Fertittas are certainly a little bit more... They wind up aligned, or like theoretically aligned with some slightly more conservative side of things because the unions are so, for a long time, doggedly entrenched with the liberal, the democratic side of things, right? And because the unions don't get along with the Fertittas for reasons, some valid, some invalid, as with most things, that kind of was where they wound up, sort of by default. But if you look at the UFC, even in pre-2020, there's not really a giant political sensibility to what they do. There's some. I'm not pretending there's not. Certain sports always tend to attract slightly more one side of the aisle or the other, and combat sports almost always leans a little bit more to the right in terms of the audience. Not exclusively, and this fluctuates, but as a general rule. Okay? But, again, pre-2020, not a whole lot there as far as the presentation goes that would lead you to believe that. And I know Donald Trump walked out as president to watch some fights before 2020, okay? I do. He did once. It was kind of cool. I'm not going to say it wasn't. Whether you like Trump or not, I would have said kind of the same thing about Obama or Biden. It was just cool, especially for me. He's been around since, the sport was legal in less than half the states in the country. To suddenly see, like, the sitting president of the United States show up to watch the card. And, Canelo Alvarez and, because that was the Diaz-McGregor, or the Diaz-Masvidal card. Because Canelo and Kovalev had to wait for them to be done, which was wild. It was a cool moment. Whether you like Trump or not, I don't care. Whether I like Trump or not, I don't care. Thought it was a cool moment. It's less cool about the third, fourth, fifth time it's happening, but But even that felt less like a big political alignment and more like Donald Trump's a fight fan and he's the president. So here he is. Then 2020 happens, and let me put it like this. If a blue state and a blue state government had been the ones that were more accommodating to the UFC's needs during the pandemic, that's where they'd be leaning right now. The UFC did not lean towards the right because they are fundamentally right aligned. At this particular moment, that side aligned with their interests, and they've been kind of stuck there since. Because California wouldn't let them do anything, and turns out leaning into the right-wing side of things, it isolated half the country. Man, if you only exist in kind of a bubble, you don't get this necessarily. But there's a segment of the left-leaning side of the country that views MMA and the UFC in particular as nothing but like propaganda. Now, I think that's stupid. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't understand how they arrived at the stupid conclusion. There's just a few points along the way that you have to make leaps that aren't really substantiated by actual data when you get into it, but who gets into it unless you're really deep into the MMA sphere? If for a couple of the major events you tune in and there's Donald Trump, and a few of these events, like the cage side seating is, oh, there's Trump, there's the Trump family, there's Elon Musk, there's the FBI director. They're like, if that's what you see when you tune in, that's the impression you're going to get. Oh, this is nothing but a platform for propaganda. Now, that's not the case for the vast majority of UFC events. In fact, a giant chunk of them take place in front of 10 drunk people in a warehouse, in a facility so devoid of personality that it may as well be my basement. Actually, it couldn't be my basement. My basement has personality. You know the point. It's being made. So they've like turned off half the country in general, and a subset of that is never coming over because they take politics like religion and whatever. I'm talking about like market strategy here, not where I land politically. So leaning into that has been paying the UFC dividends. They got this big footprint. Now they've got a giant deal. Dude, Paramount is overpaying for this. I feel pretty darn confident saying that. But we'll see how some of the specifics wind up working out for them. I mean, there's a lot to kind of hash out there. Dude, the UFC coming back to Paramount and winding up back on what used to be Spike TV is kind of hilarious. Because the UFC couldn't get on anywhere and got on Spike. Then they left Spike, not on the greatest of terms. Spike turned into Viacom briefly, then turned into the Paramount Network. Now it's, again, then it had Bellator for a while. Then CBS has a weird history with this. Like, CBS used to have Strikeforce until they had the Nashville Brawl on there, and that turned CBS off of like having MMA on it for a long time until this point actually. So yeah, what a twisted road we walk down sometimes, yeah. So there's that. Now that led to Paramount paying what they're paying, which partially they only got because around the same time the FTC approved their merger with Skydance. Which gave them access to a lot more capital. So, sure, there's nothing nefarious going on there. A powerful merger that was slightly being stymied, finally going through under the auspices of the new administration, which then is able to get the rights to sporting organization that's very friendly to the administration. Nothing nefarious going on there at all. And I lean more towards the right, guys, as a general rule. But, the politically influential and powerful are really only interested in consolidating their power and screwing everyone else over. Almost all of them. I need to caveat that. Because I got to talk about the next. Because that leads us into the fighter pay thing, because I have to talk a little bit about that. So, in a sane world, the players for this kind of a deal would get a percentage of the rights up front at the beginning of every year. In the NBA and the NFL, it's about 50%. Again, sometimes it's 51, sometimes it's 49, and how that is distributed between the individual teams and players is kind of up to them. It gets negotiated a little bit, but that's sort of a thing that the players hash out themselves. Well, players and teams, because teams get some of the broadcast too. Whole other thing. But the UFC is a little bit more structured like the NFL in that respect. So, in most of those, and not every sport has that same breakdown. NASCAR drivers don't get the same percentage of broadcast fees that NFL players do. Tennis is a little bit lower. Golf's a little bit on the low side. Now, there's a few reasons that happens that way. Golf and tennis in particular, and golf, tennis, and NASCAR, all have provisions in place whereby individual athletes and performers and competitors have individual sponsorship deals. The other thing there is, I believe in all those, NASCAR not as much. NASCAR, it's a lot of like individual teams being funded. But for golf and tennis, I believe part of the deal is they get a little bit less, they get less on the TV rights fees, the broadcast rights fees, but they get a cut of any sponsorship that goes to not just themselves, but the broadcast or the tournament or the whatever. Don't quote me on that. I believe I'd have to double check, and I'm just talking here. So there's other mechanisms whereby other bits of the revenue generation are split with the actual competitors. Now, I hate to break this to you, but, so Andrew Yang, former presidential candidate, and bless him, occasional block of wood, chimed in with, so UFC fighters got about $500 million a year, right? Somebody mentioned this, but the increased visibility and footprint of the UFC is leading a lot of people who have never been involved in this, and bear in mind, I don't mean that everyone should be involved in this, but that is a deep expression of ignorance, and he was roundly chastised for it. You had Jake Paul come out and say, well, you know what the UFC's worth now, fighters, go get your fair share. They're not getting anything. And Jake Paul knows that. Of all the people here who have said kind of stupid things about this, Jake Paul actually knows a little bit how this particular sausage is made. I'm not saying that the UFC is not going to pay out a little bit more. But if you want to understand, they're not going to move their share of yearly revenue that goes to fighter compensation above 20%. They want to keep it lower than that. And bear in mind, that's from everything. This is just for their rights deal in the USA. They still have rights deals for it to be broadcast in Brazil. They still have pay-per-view in Canada. They're still on in the UK. Like, every other region has their own things. Dude, CBS is actually, part of the deal they got here was they get to make bids on the UFC's international rights. They're making a play for the whole darn thing. So, we're going to keep an eye on that part of it. But I'm not saying the UFC's not going to pay more in sort of an absolute dollar amount, but they're going to pay less as a percentage. You don't understand how they could do that. Here's a fun little thing about that. Got a couple, actually. So, if you want to spend about 20% of the Paramount revenue, if the UFC keeps to their thing, and okay, we've now got 1.1 billion per year just in revenue from this, and we want to spend 20% on the fighters, what can we do? Here's what we can do, and spend 20%, give or take, of the Paramount revenue. We can make minimum guarantees of the following. Your minimum guarantee for an unranked fighter in the UFC is 50 grand. For top 15, 150, top 10, 200, top 5, 300,000, top 3, 400,000 champions, we can guarantee $1 million. Per event, we can have 5 performance bonuses and 1 fight of the night at current rates. They could do all that assuming 100 fighters per division, which is not accurate, but for the sake of making easy math, because some have more, most have less. But for the sake of easy math, if we just assume averages, you could do all that. And that means you have spent a little less than 20%. They're not going to do that, mind you. I assume the minimum is going to go up from 10 and 10, because that's what people come in on now. But it's not going to go to 25-25 for everybody. Certainly not going to go to 50 flat. They might do 20-20. That doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility. But 25-25 for an organization making what they're making does seem like it should be. So that's what you could do and spend 20%. Here's another way to put it. If you want a little bit of math. So the new deal, I already mentioned it. It adds about $600 million a year. Here's what you could do. You could raise every bonus. Dana White's indicated that bonuses will no longer be $50K, which is way overdue. You could raise the bonus to $75K. And that's going to add 4.3 total million per year in bonus money. You could make the minimum 14 and 14. I think 15-15 probably is what they're going to do, but 20-20 is like what I think the ethical minimum should be, but well, here we are. So minimum, so if you go, everyone is at least 14-14. It's another 10 million a year in fighter pay. You're going to have to redo contracts because pay-per-views are going away. Everyone who has pay-per-view points, most of them haven't even been getting them anyway because pay-per-view sales have been so bad. But you're going to have to redo those and replace pay-per-view points to anyone who already has them. So let's say hypothetically that winds up adding, 60 million, give or take, to your expenses. And you can, all of that done, would raise total fighter pay by 33% from where it is right now. Now, you might be saying, boy, that sounds great. Here's the kicker. The revenue share for the UFC fighters under that structure would drop from 16% of year-to-year revenue to 15% of yearly revenue. They could do all that and still lose a percentage point of yearly revenue when it's all said and done. And that's probably what about is going to happen. Credit to John Nash for the math on that. Because I didn't want to do it. I am bad at math. Got through all that. Okay, so going through some of my notes there. So that's where all that is. I don't even really know what to do with all that. So fighter pay, point being, you will see some increase of real numbers. But the fact that they could increase overall fighter pay, fighter compensation by a third, and actually drop the revenue split down another percentage point is crazy. So that's where we are on that. Yeah, fighter pay's not, it's not going to change, guys. I know there's a bunch of people going, well, no, it's totally going to change. Why would you think that? Again, do I think the UFC is going to institute a few changes that will, because their ceiling increased dramatic? If your ceiling goes up 18 feet, okay, you can raise the floor 6 inches. That's what's going to happen. That's the meta, if you want to stick with that one. That's what's going to happen here. And fighters are just going to be happy that, when we're 6 inches further from the ground. Matt Brown talks about this, the first half or so of Rider versus Fighter. Listen to that one. Matt Brown talks a little bit about it, like why he had Rich Franklin telling him to think about this like a business, negotiate like a business. And because he was younger and dumber, didn't listen. Now he's the older guy trying to tell the younger guys it's a business. Treat it like a business. And because they're younger and dumber, they're not going to do it. There is no collective bargaining for the fighters. I'm not going to beat this drum too much. I'm bringing it up because it needs to be brought up. The fighters are not going to do anything because they have never done anything. They rely on the largesse of the UFC. Very few of them ever have enough leverage to try and make real money out of this. And so they're just going to get the rounding error that they can out of a company that's now making $1 billion a year. So I'm not going to beat that drum too much. I'm going to a couple of things that I think are somewhat adjacent that are worth at least mentioning. So Josh Barnett chimed in on this, and I don't always agree with Josh Barnett, but I take him seriously because he deserves to be taken seriously. His stance, and he's been hitting this drum for a little bit. Sorry, I'm going to be done using that metaphor. He says that base pay isn't really much of an issue. The problem that the UFC is running into, and MMA in general, is that there's almost no money at the top end, especially relative to what you can get what it should be. If you look at the revenue the UFC generates, and, okay, entry-level guys, they don't make a whole lot. But the top-end guys, they should be making a lot of money, right? Turns out, no, they don't. That's the major deterrent, not so much, well, what do you mean I have to get in for 10 and 10? Look, getting into 10 and 10 in the UFC when they were making $700 million a year was, I thought, pathetic. But Josh Barnett does kind of have a point here. No one's enticed by the minimum to get into the NFL. You're enticed by what the big dogs make. The fact that the minimum in the NFL is still so much money is a really nice bonus. But you'd still have a lot of people chomping at the bit to get into the NFL based on the upper end earning potential. Even if you cut the lower end in half, which would still be what, $500,000 a year, give or take? Something close to that. That's just a salary, mind you. Like, that's to say nothing of what you. There's smart NFL players right now whose NFL, and bear in mind, financial literacy in the NFL is not everyone has it, but there's a couple of smart ones who have been open about, I am not spending what the NFL pays me, I am spending sponsorship money. Because if you can get one, that's the smart thing to do. Because the NFL only pays you after a game. Like, there's this during the off season of the NFL, you don't get paid. There's a weird thing, but kind of how they're structured. That's how they used to be. I don't know if they've changed that recently. But understanding which part of your money, so there's guys who are like, okay, my sponsorship money is what I'm going to spend on my living expenses, on whatever I'm going to buy for other people, and all my NFL salary is sitting here, and if I really need it, I'll touch it. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there and make me money. Smart way to go about it. But you're enticed by the upper end. If the lower end guys in the NFL, when it's all said and done, I think between what you make from the team, and it might even include the broadcast, but I'm not broadcast fees, but I'm not sure about that. You're still making what's the minimum right now? 900 something. It's around $1 million. It's a little less, but it's around $1 million. So there's people who could just getting into the NFL. You will make a lot of good money. But again, what drives you to get there is not that you can sit on the bench and make a lot of money. It's the potential of bonuses, of championships, of all the upper end stuff. That's what drives you. That's what motivates you. And that is lacking in MMA. The top end stuff is really lacking. So, I would rather see minimums go up as well, but Josh Barnett's not wrong. I would rather raise the ceiling a little bit more personally, or excuse me, I'd rather raise the floor a little bit more, but somebody got, because Brian Stan was on the weigh-in show, God bless him. If he's actually coming back to some kind of broadcast deal, get him back on commentary, get rid of Daniel Cormier, please. But anyway, moving on from that. There was a question asked, because the weigh-in shows are just like bad variety podcasts. But the question was asked at one point, because they take questions from the audience. Jared Cannonier, still a top 10, I think, at the time of that fight, middleweight at 41. How can a guy at 41 still be finding success in an athletic endeavor? Well, when NFL players especially have shorter careers. Well, we all chimed in on the internet because the NFL every year brings in a bunch of new guys who are really hungry and really good. And they're desperate to take those spots. The UFC does a bad job attracting talent. The UFC does a bad job motivating talent. And that's why you can have some guys can have this weird longevity. Because you shouldn't be 40 years old and still having all this success. I'll give you that. Shouldn't. But who's come into the middleweight division reliably in the last 5 years? Tell you what, last 3 years. Who's come in and made a serious push to get the old guys out? You've had a few guys rise up the ranks, but Caio Borralho's been here for a while. Khamzat Chimaev's kind of been here for a while. He was here before COVID. This is not a quick endeavor in a lot of respects, and part of it is, again, a lot of guys just not being enticed to come into it at all. So, yeah, there's that. Okay, what was the third thing? I had a third point here, and I wish I'd written it down. Oh, yeah, death of pay-per-view. Okay. So there's an almost poetic, prose-heavy piece by, I think it was Jonathan Snowden. Double check that. Yeah. It's on the Hybrid Shoot Substack. And he asks what the death of pay-per-view will mean for fans. A lot of fans are kind of happy. I'm happy not to have to spend as much money on pay-per-views. I get reimbursed for them. I'm still happy not to have to deal with it. Because $80 a pop was ridiculous. Ridiculous. So the UFC is locked into events. They were looking at, 13 numbered events a year and 30 regular events, so 43 total, which is kind of where it's been for a while on average. A few years, the UFC's gotten up to like 45, but 43 is about where they've averaged out, so they're kind of locking that in. Um, but yeah, like spending $80 on 13 events a year, $80 each on 13 events a year, that adds up, man. MMA is an expensive fandom if you turn in for everything. I'm okay with that. Snowden's point, and other people have raised it, part of what made the UFC have to work was still the potential to sell. They needed to put a good card together to sell you on buying it. That's not really a thing anymore, more or less. So they don't really have an incentive to put together really stacked cards and really put out the best product they have. What they're incentivized to do is make sure they hit all their minimums for the giant paycheck at the end, and this is just a bunch of soulless machinery turning over. And the solidification of that into nothing but guaranteed revenue, they were halfway there already with the ESPN deal, if you looked at how ESPN was paying them for pay-per-views and whatnot. To go all the way to that is to just remove the incentive structure. It's the people doing the, you only trust sale. You really want your salesman to operate on commission. Because if they don't operate on commission, what's the incentive structure to actually sell anything? Now, that's maybe an overly cynical way to look at it, but it's not unfounded. The UFC has been kind of sleepwalking for a while. Fans have been complaining about it for a couple of years. And again, the fact that this has kind of come around, the UFC suffered a little bit of a downturn over the last 18 months, 2 years. Not a catastrophic one, but let's not pretend it hasn't been down. We've been talking about a bunch of bad fight cards and how much the Apex sucks, and that's been a whole thing, and I'm sticking by it. I said what I said in the past. Some of it I've reevaluated, some of it I've reevaluated and reaffirmed my position. So that's not a thing. That's coincided with getting towards the end of this generation of fandom and these life cycles. That's how it goes. They don't actually have to worry about that anymore. As long as they do the minimums, they get the big check at the end of the year. When I said that I'm pretty sure that Paramount's overpaying for this is a little bit what I mean. I don't know that the UFC has the same fan base that it used to have. Again, they have just absolutely cut off, call it a third of the country that is just never. Like 1/3 of the left-leaning part of the country. So 1/3 of one half. The other 2/3 of that half are leery at best, would need a real hard sell, and the UFC is not going to give them a real hard sell. So there's that. Best case scenario is half. Then there's the fact that this is still combat sports, and combat sports is always an iffy proposition about how many people tune into it on a regular basis to begin with. The UFC has watered down its own product in the interest of serving mandatory minimums. That is undeniable at this point. They don't care how good the fights are. They care that enough bodies show up to hit all their airtime requirements. That's it. So, and that's been true for a while. Again, that's been true for a while. That's not new. What's moderately new is the way in which this deal without pay-per-view at all, like really solidifies how not individual fight, individual card driven the UFC will be for the entirety of this 7-year deal. So the UFC's business is fine and dandy. The MMA ecosystem is poor. The UFC did make a little bit of a push the last few weeks. They signed a few guys out of like Octagon. They're trying to do a little. They've heard the complaints. They're not deaf to them. I think they are making more of a push to try and find higher level non-UFC talent. But they got some bad press from the Veretanikov thing where he won on the Contender Series, and they were like, well, we can only offer you 10 and 10, even though you're one of the better kickboxers of the last generation. And he said, no, thank you. I can make more money doing other things. And that was a loss. They're not going to feel it, but objectively, it's a loss. So what the UFC zombie product looks like, I don't know. Dude, Dana White's going to be around to kind of just take a victory lap and then check out. He is so not necessary anymore. And he's going to go be kind of in charge of TKO boxing probably. Oh, minor note. None of the ancillary stuff comes with this deal. The Ultimate Fighter was not part of this deal. The Road to UFC was not part of this deal. The Contender Series was not part of this deal. This is UFC stuff only. I think we're still going to see the distinctive tiers of content. You're going to have the numbered events where they really want to try and draw interest and sell tickets. You're going to have the generic fight nights, and then you're going to have the Apex slop. I think that breakdown is still going to be a thing, even under the new deal. But the lower, again, the other stuff, the Ultimate Fighter, all that crap, still does not have a home. Might still wind up staying with ESPN. Who knows? So that's the size of it, ladies and gentlemen. The UFC now has guaranteed $1.1 billion per year from Paramount, and we're going to see what that does to the product when it's all said and done. That's starting next year, so enjoy the last of the pay-per-view era. Apart from whatever one-offs the UFC think they can shear the fleece, they can, shear the sheep on. Fighters are going to get nothing. They're going to get whatever the UFC deigns to give them because that's all they've ever gotten. And boxing's about to become a whole lot worse under the same system being moved over there. So, great time to be a combat sports fan, isn't it? Ugh. I don't mean to be too down on that, but it's late, I'm tired, and that's kind of where my head's going. Which means it's probably about time for me to wrap this up. I've been going for 2.5 hours now, so yeah. Alright, yeah, let me check. Oh, real briefly. PFL had one of their finales. They got a nice upset win for, the Axeman. He beat Rabodinov in a pretty big upset. Alfie, what is it? Oh, I can't remember his name. Alfie Davis. And Liz Carmouche, at age 41, won another PFL tournament. So good for her. One of the OGs of women's MMA. All right, that shout-out's done. Okay, I'm going to check the old social medias, then see if anything crazy is broken. If not, I'm going to bed because it's very late. I'm very tired. And yeah, so let me check. Nope, I don't see anything new there, so let's get into plugs. Monday, on Damn You Hollywood, Mark Radulich and I will be reviewing, something about the night. Night Always Comes. It's a Netflix movie because nothing of value is being released in the theaters, so Tune in for that. Last week, we reviewed the absolutely terrible Amazon Prime War of the Worlds movie on Monday. On Tuesday, we reviewed Weapons, a good movie, thankfully. Starting to wonder if they actually existed this year. I've seen so precious few of them. Let's see. Then Friday, WWE SmackDown. Saturday, early morning, UFC on ESPN plus 115. Sunday, I will be covering Sunday Forbidden Door. Let me check. Yeah. Sunday, I will be covering AEW's Forbidden Door, which starts at what? 11 my time? I think that's when it is. I don't know, something like that. Yeah, looking like, 1 Eastern, so 11 my time. All right, I'll be covering that on Sunday, so yeah. And then we'll be back here in the evening after all that to review UFC on ESPN plus 115, and we will preview. We will not preview? We're taking the 30th off. We will not have a preview, just a review. Next card will be the 6th of September. That will be the Paris card, headlined by Imavov and Bahalio. What else is there? Santoni and Houfi, that's good. Tavares and Burchak. That's not how you pronounce that, but I can't remember how to pronounce it. Gustafsson and Fakhmedinov. Pitbull and Keita. That's a good fight. Give me something else good here. It's got to be something. No. Maybe. Probably not. Umar C probably gets another win. That's something. Ferris Ziam and Kawhi Fernandez. Okay, that one's not terrible. All right, more on that by the time we actually get to it, so we'll have a couple of weeks. But next week, a review. And again, whatever news comes out between now and then, we'll just have to wait and see on that front, won't we? All right. That's it for me. I've been talking for too long. It's way too early in the morning now at this point. God, I suck. All right. I'll see y'all next week. Until then, stay safe. And continue to be well, be safe, and behave. Almost forgot my own outro there. Jeez. Yeah. I'm way too punchy for this. All right. I'll see you next week, everybody. Continue to be well, be safe, and behave.